Alright, so here we are with machine settings. Honestly, this is going to be kind of a generic little clip, but I thought it would be worth discussing. The problem here is every machine is going to be different, from not even just brand to brand, but potentially from model to model within the brand. Plus two, if you got older machines that aren't computerized, I couldn't even tell you what to begin with on the older machines. The last time I used one of those older machines that wasn't computerized was probably 15 or more years ago. What you have here usually with the new computerized models are a little visual here on the front showing exactly all the different stitch patterns that we want, and lucky for us there's usually only one or two that we need whenever you're customizing a jersey, putting the numbers on. Usually in this case, more often than not, you're going to use number 3, which on this machine is the zigzag stitch. And then on occasion, I'm sure there might be straight stitch, which here is 0. So I've got this little graphic here to tell me which ones to use. So switch to number 3. Switch to number 3, and then at least on this machine, we have the next two numbers here. The first number that you have here in the middle, currently it says 5.0. That's the stitch width for the zigzag itself. And now I've got a couple of different settings here on my little handy dandy sheet from Stalls that I've mentioned before on these video series. I kind of put little notes here just so that I can remind myself exactly what I'm doing when I'm doing it. And these are the settings that I use. You can see there in the red. I've got the settings that I prefer to use with this machine for big numbers, and then the same settings for smaller numbers and patches. So when it comes to the big numbers that are on the back, I prefer it to be around 4 for the stitch width, and then this next number here is the stitch length. So that I usually like to be for big numbers around 1.5. Press down here a couple, so up and down change your stitch length, and then the left and right change on this machine the stitch width. So just had a conversation with somebody the other day. The computerized machines, even from brand to brand, I would assume are roughly going to be within this same general settings range, you would think. But I wouldn't take these numbers at heart. That's why we have things like these little test numbers that we've stripped off of old jerseys. You can see here, like I did here, I put my settings in and just ran a quick line all the way up that number just to make sure that it was going to line up with what I wanted to do on the next number that I sewed down. So I always keep pieces like that around. I've mentioned it before. Just every so often, if I've not touched the machine in a while, dial up the settings that I want, run a quick line, and just make sure that it's matching what I want. The nice thing is most times that I get kits, I'm getting them from a shop that's already at least pre-stitched around the edge. So I can see all of these different stitch settings here that they've used. And again, I will take this number that I have tested with. And I'm sure it's going to be kind of hard to see on camera, but I can just double check that on the good section here, the jump from stitch to stitch is basically lining up, and then the height, I'll just overlay this and make sure that my height is pretty dang close there. So I'm happy with that. I'll keep these settings for the big number. They match up pretty well with most of the kits that I've been getting from the suppliers that I get them from. So those are those two main settings there. It's really just a stitch. You might want to mess around with your own. They might vary from supplier to supplier. That's just the settings that I found that I like from where I get my kits from. They work really well for me. From there, there's only a couple of things really that we can talk about that really would be relevant from pretty much everybody. So you may or may not have this button here, which is a reverse stitch. So it'll keep the same pattern. In this case, if I get to a certain part on the number, it'll keep my zigzag. It'll just start doing a reverse. So that'll be useful at the very end, potentially, if you want to double or triple overlap. The next thing, and this is going to be a machine by machine basis, your thread tension right here dial. For this particular machine, they suggest keeping it on 5. It just keeps, and I'll do an overlay here to kind of give you an illustration of what they mean when they say it's thread tension. It's the tension, the pull between the thread that you're coming on from the top here, and then any of the thread coming from the bottom. They each have their own tensions. Usually you don't have to touch the bobbin thread tension. That comes set from a factory, and usually you don't ever have to touch that. But refer to whatever document might come with the packaging for the bobbin itself. But the tension from the main thread reel can be adjusted here. Again, this machine suggests a 5 right in the middle between 1 and 10. I happen to turn mine down just a little bit. As you can see on this diagram, if the tension for the thread is too much, it's going to pull your thread down through the fabric a bit, and then if it's not tight enough, and actually I think I said that backwards, if it's not tight enough, it's going to pull the thread down through the fabric, and if it's too tight, then it's going to pull your bobbin thread up through in this case, the numbers. So you don't want either. I just happen to make mine a little bit looser than the 5 that the machine recommends, just because it looks a bit cleaner to me whenever I'm actually sewing through any of the twill. So there's that. This isn't necessarily a setting, but some machines you'll be able to pull this piece out here. Just in this case for this machine, it's a little storage unit. I can keep stuff in it, but it's also something to do with like free-form sewing. In occasions, I like to take that out. It can make it easier to get through some stuff whenever you're working through some maybe tight locations, getting numbers on a shoulder or on a sleeve. I'll take that out, but then whenever I get to big numbers on the back, I'll kind of slide this back in. That way I have a bit more depth to work with and support for the jersey and the number. I guess the last thing, again, it's not really setting, but here on the side, you've got the wheel that actually, the manual wheel for moving the needle up and down. From my own experience years ago trying to teach myself how to sew again, and I can tell you that I've seen a couple people recently kind of learned the same thing. As you're working your way through sewing whatever onto the jersey, if you make a mistake, don't think that just because there's this backup button here, you can't and you shouldn't ever turn the wheel the wrong direction to back up once the stitch has been made. That's not going to work, and in fact you're just going to jack up the machine, and it's going to start causing jams, and it's going to completely mess up all of the stitching that you're doing around the edge of the number of the letter. Don't ever touch that to go backwards. By all means, if you get near the edge of a number or a letter, right near the end point, if you stop using the pedal, the foot pedal, you can take this. Usually what I do is a stitch or two from the edge. I start taking this and I just rotate it and just finish off that last thread or two by hand, just so that I know it's going to finish exactly where I want it to. Some machines are quicker than others, and they will zip right through where you're going, so it takes some really good feel for the pedal to get it to work. In this case, I don't believe this machine of mine has the capability, some do, of being able to finish with the needle in a down position, which would be nice. And in this case, that's why I do the last couple manually, just so that I'm ending exactly where I want to. Even if I had that capability on this machine, I probably would still do the last couple of threads by hand. But that's also another setting that you might find with your machine. You may find the ability to program it so that the needle ends in a down position rather than up and out of the fabric. Perhaps the only other thing worth mentioning is on the back here. Again, this might just be particular to this machine, but there's this little foot. Keep in mind, on occasion, your jersey might get caught back here. And what this does is if I flip this here, this little presser foot actually flips right off. But it's very easy to get back up there. All you got to do is, I can't do this one-handed, but to put it back on, you just pull this back up, and then the foot just goes right back up, and there's a little spot here. It just goes right back up in. So don't freak out if that happens while you're sewing. It's really easy to put it back in, and it's not like you have to stop and take the jersey off and fix that and put it, like, start the sewing back up again. You can literally fix it right in the motions of having the pedal stop. So don't freak out about that. So otherwise, there's not really much I can think of to talk about. So on to the next one.